Rolling right into this second tutorial, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into mixing materials and using node-based shading systems to our advantage. Being able to reuse, repurpose, and manipulate universal inputs to specifically get the effect you want will be the goal of this round, as I'll continue to demonstrate using a variety of nodes we've already covered to generate maps and show how simple redshift makes generating color layers and material blending. We're going to set this project up the same as before with a simple text layout and an HDRI, so set up a title you like and let's dive right into it. Progressing on from making simple maps from a single texture or node input, we can use the redshift's layer and blending nodes to create complex map composites to suit our needs. Quite simply, to blend colors, you use a color layer node, and to blend materials, you use a material blender node. They function pretty similarly, but one is specific to creating maps and blending colors, and the other is to merge together materials. To start off, we're going to go ahead and read in your favorite texture. I'm going to read in the same grungy metal texture that I used in the previous section, and I'm going to go ahead and connect that to the base color input on this color layer. I'm going to delete this blender, and we'll get back to that later. But go ahead and plug the texture into the base color and plug the output color into a diffuse channel so we can see what's going on, and you'll immediately see it is black. This is because the color layer, layer 1 by default, is on and the default color is black, so when you toggle it you'll notice you'll get the texture passing through normally. While I get this texture set up and stick a quick try planar in line here so it projects well, you'll notice that in the color layer there's quite a lot of inputs. This includes the base color, which we are just connected to, layer 1 color, layer 1 mask, layer 2 color, layer 2 mask, etc., etc. For each input that you have in the color layer, you're going to have the ability to input color data as well as feeding it a mask for each of the layers that you connect to the color layer itself. So let's keep building. I'm going to grab a noise out of there and plug it right into layer 1 color. Don't forget to go back in there and re-enable layer 1, and you'll see it'll immediately kick over and show the noise as normal. This is because the blend mode is set to normal. If you cycle through the operations, you'll see when you set to add or set to multiply, it's going to composite itself on top of the image we have in base color. You can freely toggle any of the settings in the noise and everything will update accordingly. Enable and disable toggle in the color layer also makes it convenient to simply turn off a input as a whole. We're going to also modify the noise a little bit. Go ahead and grab a ramp, set that to Alt, and then drag it into color layer, and it should look identical because we've not modified the ramp in any way. But if you crush it down, you'll see it'll have a pretty dramatic impact on the resulting image coming out of the color layer. At any point in time, even after you have a ramp set in line with the noise leading into the color layer, you have the ability to modify any of the noise controls and change them and tweak them any way you want. So tweak them to taste, and then go ahead and grab a curvature node, as we're going to kind of keep expanding on this node madness here and get a little bit deeper and get some more intentional control on where we want this, where we want certain colors on this map. So go ahead, grab that curvature layer, and I'm going to say put that into layer 2 color, enable it, and you'll instantly see curvature is triggering on the model and is acting as it would in default. So let's just immediately kind of get this and dial it up to taste. I'm going to increase the radius here a little bit, make it a little smoother. And just as we did in the previous tutorial, we're going to use noise and use that to agitate the curvature a little bit by plugging it into the gain. And you'll see it starts to break it up and we start getting a little bit more of a complex edge detection that then is being modified by the noise we're feeding it. I'm going to play with the settings of the noise a little bit here and try to kind of get it a little more in line with what I'm looking for. Going to tweak the scale a little bit here so we can't make it a little smaller. It's looking a little bit better. In addition to all these tweaks here, I'm going to go ahead and grab a ramp node as well and drop that right in line with the curvature leading to the color layer. Make sure to set it to Alt so that we get the input correct. And then crush it on down so we can kind of see what we're working with here and the kind of ranges that we can get out of this color layer that we're building. you can see there's a good amount of definition in the float, and when we crush it down, there is a good amount of latitude in this. As we start toggling through some of the settings, you can see it's very easy to build yourself color layer setups and toggle them on and off to see how each individual layer affects the ones underneath it. In addition, any of the input that you can put into any of the color is something that you can also input into the mask, but we're going to deal with that a little bit later. So just go ahead and disconnect that, and we're going to touch on that in a little more detail in a minute. But for now, we're going to go back into the color layer, re-enable it, and set it to multiply, and take a look at the resulting map we get from that. So overall, you can see that it does get it pretty dark. We did take the ramp and crush the values down a good bit and give it a lot of black values so that when we multiply, it does take out good chunks to the middle. But what we're going to do next is kind of play with this ramp a little bit and see how the levels result in the image. So when you slide that out just a little bit, you can see that it'll reveal more of the white underneath because less of the values are reaching black, and thus revealing more of the lightness of the maps underneath. At this point, a good question to ask is kind of what map are we making here? And if you take a look at it, one could argue that if we're trying to create some worn metal texture or worn metal material, that this black and white map that we're making could arguably be used for a reflection weight. But when you look at it, you can tell that since the current outsides are white and the faces are black, what that's going to do for reflection weight is have the edges be exposed and show reflection, where the faces will have the reflection turned totally off, and that is the opposite of what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a ramp node and we're going to use it a little bit differently than we have in the past. So just as you've crushed the values before, just go ahead and swing it the total opposite way and reverse the black and white. Let's see, you're going to crush the black down a little bit more, and then finally you'll see you'll get the map essentially reverse, and we have successfully switched the white with the black and then recrushed it into a map that's more suited for reflection weight. So go up to the material, go to the reflection weight and plug it right in, and immediately you'll see you will get the map that we have just inverted and recrushed with the ramp is now connected to reflection weight. Boost that exposure a little bit to see it a little more clearly, and you can see it has a really dramatic impact very quickly, and we've accurately built a black and white map that we've now interpreted to be used as reflection weight. So at this point, I'm going to kind of let the recording run and play a little bit while I add, another noise layer to it and kind of add some complexity to this roughness map to kind of talk a little bit more deeper understanding about what's going on with some of the, for example, when you're plugging noise into a curvature into the gain like I was doing, and what exactly is happening there. When you look at the defaults within a curvature node or anything like that, you'll see that by default, they'll go to a range of 0 to 1. Sometimes the default's 0.5 or 1 or 0. And what that essentially means, when you refer to those connections as 0 to 1, that is also the same as referring them to black to white. 0 being black, 1 being white. So when you pass a noise to a curvature and you see how it's agitating the gain or bias or radius of it, that's because you're feeding it a spatially variable map that is then allowing that specific function to be remapped. So any sort of texture or color information from black to white, whether it's you read in a texture, whether it's you generate noise, whether it's an explicit color value as like a float, that'll all get treated the same. Usually if it's 0 to 1, there are some exceptions for how it calculates float, and if you read in, like, let's say an 8-bit JPEG, but we're not going to worry about the super specifics of that right now. But instead, we're going to, now that we've kind of roughened this thing up a little bit more and gotten some more surface interest, we're going to go ahead and start reusing some of these assets we've created in different ways, and try to just kind of keep pushing this and showing how we can reuse the work we've already done to kind of push this product a little bit further. So let's say at this point, hypothetically, we're pretty happy with where it's at, and we just want to keep going and add some more detail along to this model and kind of, add some bump to it, give it some more light play, and kind of get it ready to render out and work with it a little bit more. what we're going to do is we're going to reuse the triplanar because it already has, we're already using that map in a few areas. And if you think about it, if we reuse that map and we put the bump in certain places, we would be matching similar reflection weight differences in this material, so the bump will line up well. Now, your first instinct might be to go ahead and grab another color layer, drag it out there, and yep, node is big, takes up a lot of real estate in here, and that may not necessarily be what we need. So what I'm going to show you is called the RS color composite. This is a single operation, single function node where you have two inputs and you tell it how to blend it and it gives you the result. This exists if you need single operations for smaller things and due to the fact that you cannot take a color layer and plug it into another color layer. So this is what you would use in this case, because all I know that I want to do is kind of take the triplanar projected little roughness map that I've got. I want to use a curvature to say I do not want bump on the edges of this letter, combine it to knock it out, and then plug it into the bump map. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a bump map out of there. We're going to plug in the texture and then go ahead and wire it into the material by going into overall and selecting bump. So you'll immediately see it'll affect it pretty dramatically because now we have the bump active. And I'm going to go over to the color composite here and finally set a blend operation so the curvature will start to influence the result. But what we're going to do beforehand is just drop a ramp in here so we can control this a little bit better and kind of control the range of the curvature result. So plug that into the blend color. Now if we crush it down a bit, and set it to multiply, and we notice it's a little weird. And sometimes you need to pipe out a segment of your node tree to kind of validate, what's going on, if you might have missed something, might have missed a setting, and kind of see how your black to white maps are being evaluated. So just in this case, I'm going to make a quick another material, set the reflection weight to 0, and just take the result we have, plug it into the diffuse color, and we can output this other material to the surface. And hey, that does not look correct. So checking, I know what that is. I forgot to set it to Alt, and now we've troubleshot where that little hiccup was, and we can go back, crush the ramp down a little bit, and we start to see some of the curvature kick in. But before we go any further, just kind of expand that radius and give the boost a little bit in the curvature. So, because again, what we're trying to build here is a black and white map that we're multiplying over the base bump so that we can knock out the bump on the edges. We do not want bump on the edge, so we're going to multiply it down to a value of 0 so no bump gets extruded from there, as we only want bump in the faces because the look of this one is polished edge and then rough face. So now that we've got that set up, we can even take a closer look and see where how much bump is being added here. And it has a pretty harsh transition when you go from black to this like bright white and then some like mid-scale gray in the range as well. There's a big range of values here. So we're going to grab another ramp here and we're going to take this output and we're going to just drop this ramp in line there, and then we're going to hand remap these values for this grayscale to kind of get this more in line with what you would expect from a bump map. Because what we're really trying to do is trying to get all this to be black and then have some like gray areas where this bump would extrude a little bit and we'd have some extra damage. Whereas this one, you'd see a gradual ramp up into some significant raised sections. We want some sharp raised sections as opposed to some just a larger, flatter raised surface. So you can see as we start to really play with the values of this ramp and start crushing it down into some more extreme values, we're going to start getting a better result. As soon as you pull this down the face, it gets a lot more crunched. And this is looking a little more in line with what we would expect from a real bump map. So now that we're confident we've gotten this a little more in the ballpark, we're going to switch it back to the other material, and instantly when we kick back, that is looking pretty good. That is acting as we expect, given, we understand that we're creating a map in a range of 0 to 1, 0 being no bump, 1 being full bump. We controlled it into a range where it made sense that we are getting just, a baseline height in the bump, and then we are offsetting in a range, as opposed to having this massive ramp where we're going to get very weird surface bowing, although that entirely might be your creative intent, that we decided to not do that in this case. So before we move on, I'm just going to go back to this ramp up here, and because I can, plug it into the reflection roughness to just kind of use that same bump map as reflection roughness. Obviously, if something bumps up, it'll be a little bit rougher. So I think that's going to be it for this section. So if you've been following along, we're going to move on to material blending next. It should seem totally intuitive if at this point you've been following along and see how we've made color layers. It kind of functions the same way. So after a little bit of cleanup here, go up and grab yourself a material blender. So let's drop the material blender down in there and go connect the material we've been working on as base color. We'll use that as the base here as we finish this out. So let's get yourself some room again. And we'll, of course, need another material to mix. So drag that guy out and connect it in and put it in layer 1. And you'll see that the operations at this point are pretty identical to a color layer. So you see the panel on the inside of the material blender is a little bit different, but not too different. We do get direct access to the blend colors, as well as the option of making the material additive. So if you go ahead and connect the material blender to the output, you won't see anything right away. This is primarily because the blend color is set to 0 or black, and thus we're not seeing anything. So if you go into the material blender and set the blend color to white, it'll full turn on and you'll see it switch over. And to make it a little more obvious, let's go into the presets and just set that to gold. And yes, now we see the material is full on and fully layered above the base material. If you go back in, change the blend color to black, the other one will be revealed. So let's get a little fancy with our masking here and make yourself a noise and a curvature, as we've done many times before. This time we're going to use the layer mask. So plug the curvature into the blend color and that'll function as a mask, and you'll see the gold pop around the edge of the letters. So at this point, I'd kind of consider this section or this increment of these tutorials finished. We've done this multiple times before where we've used noise and curvature and kind of adjusted the maps to the ballpark of where and what we want. So that's not what I'm going to talk about, but rather I hope that you guys have been able to see how you can use node-based workflows and kind of reuse the assets you've read in and kind of repurpose it for the different kind of maps that you need. We read in a texture, we used it, we projected it with a triplanar. It is being used in our reflection weight. It is being used in our bump. We've created a custom curvature to knock it out the bump, and we've reused that material in the reflection weight map in a different way. Each of them was remapped with a ramp to their specific purposes, and we've gotten a lot of mileage out of a single texture and then procedurally generating some inner outer wear and converting it into a bump, in the process making this slightly overcooked trailer text. So I hope that this kind of gave you some better insights on how to work in Redshift, how to work in node-based systems. This should be universally applicable to pretty much any node-based system if the utility nodes that we've covered are the same. But I hope that you guys get some mileage out of this, and happy layering.